Hello, I'm Jim Turk, the Director of the Center for Free Expression, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2025 presentation of the Peter Bryce Prize for Whistleblowing. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the territory on which I am speaking to you today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I'd also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. The Center for Free Expression awards the Peter Bryce Prize annually to recognize and honor individuals who have served the greater good in society by courageously speaking up about wrongdoing and abuses of public trust. The prize is named after Dr. Peter H. Bryce, a Canadian physician and whistleblower who in 1904 was appointed the medical inspector up to the then Department of the Interior and Indian Affairs. His duties a few years later were extended to studying the health conditions in the Canadian residential school system. He was appalled by what he found. His research and his report exposed that the death rate of children in residential schools averaged between 14 and 24%. His superiors in the Canadian federal government refused to publish his report. Bryce persisted in writing and speaking about what was happening in Canada's residential schools, ultimately leaving his job in the federal government and publishing a pamphlet entitled The Story of a National Crime. The Peter Bryce Prize comes with an award of $10,000, made possible by the generosity of the Zita and Mark Bernstein Family Foundation, and we're grateful to them for their support. The Center for Free Expression launched the Peter Bryce Prize in 2021, and this year's winner, Scott Campbell, is the fifth recipient. I'd like to call on my colleague now, Ian Braun, a senior fellow at the Center for Free Expression, to tell you about Scott Campbell. Ian?
Hi, Jim. Thanks. Yes, I'd like to welcome Scott Campbell here. When dealing with whistleblowers, one meets all kinds of personalities. Sometimes it can take some work to know whether a person is genuine. That wasn't the case with Scott. I knew immediately that he was a real deal, smart, principled, and determined. Scott was an employee at Opportunities New Brunswick, a Crown corporation. His case wasn't a spectacular one. I mean, nobody died, but this is part of what makes it so remarkable. You see, Scott simply took a stand. When instructed to do so, he refused to falsify information about a company seeking a grant from the New Brunswick government. This information was to be used to brief the cabinet. This seems basic. Public servants shouldn't lie to their ministers, and they shouldn't be punished for refusing to do so. I should note here that the refusal to participate in misconduct is a form of whistleblowing because it forces wrongdoers to face their own misconduct. This can create resentment, and a principled individual may be targeted to set an example or to intimidate them into silence. That's certainly what it looks like here. Scott became a target of harassment after his refusal. He made a complaint which was investigated and dismissed as baseless after a lengthy 10-month investigation. He then complained to the New Brunswick Employment Standards Branch, but again, it refused to investigate. He was fired in 2020. With a less determined and resourceful person, it might have stopped there. But this is the other remarkable thing about Scott. He kept fighting. Because he didn't trust the New Brunswick's whistleblowing law, for good reason, he used the Employment Standards Act, which prohibits reprisals for allegations of wrongdoing. In 2021, as a self-represented litigant, he won. I can't emphasize enough how remarkable and rare this is. Again, you might think that this would be the end of the matter and that he would be reinstated and compensated. Unfortunately, his former employer refuses to admit they've lost. Using taxpayer money, they continue to fight him. Perhaps they hope he'll give up. If so, they're wrong. I can't predict the future, but I'm confident that he will be compensated for all that he's been through. He's certainly earned that right. And, being the person he is, he refuses to just walk away. He wants to make sure that future New Brunswick whistleblowers have an easier time than he did. One way he's doing this is by trying to win a precedent in which implicated organizations are held responsible for whitewashing bogus investigations intended to cover up the wrongdoing. If he succeeds in this, he'll eliminate one of the most common reprisal techniques used against whistleblowers, and that would be a win for the ages. He's also advocating for a new, revamped, effective whistleblower law. In other words, he's joining our community of public interest advocates. So it's with great pleasure I introduce Scott Campbell, who embodies the spirit of principled courage and determination that Canada needs. Congratulations, Scott.
Thank you, Ian. It is a privilege to be with you today. Thank you to the Center for Free Expression Selection Committee and staff, the Zita and Mark Bernstein Family Foundation for their continued support of this award, and for all those who advocate on behalf of whistleblowers and whistleblower reform in Canada. Being named the 2025 Peter Bryce Prize recipient is a tremendous honor. I am proud to carry forward Peter Bryce's example. Defying bureaucratic pressure, he risked his career to expose the public health atrocity and showing how integrity and compassion can bring about change. I'm a proud New Brunswicker, a proud Canadian, and a proud 2025 recipient of the Peter Bryce Prize.
Well, Scott, we're honored to be able to present it to you and to recognize you for all you've done. And for the audience, since we wanted to do this virtually, Scott's in New Brunswick, Ian's actually in the Netherlands right now, and all of you are in various places across the country. I'm not physically able to hand you the prize, but we did have it shipped to you. If you could hold it up for people.
Absolutely.
And so formally, I'm happy to present this to you, along with the check for $25,000, or for $10,000 rather. Sorry, I just inflated the amount.
Thank you.
And it's really, as I say, it is an honor for us to recognize what you've done, not only to stand up for, the proper behavior of a person in the position you were in, but also as a model to others who are subjected to demands that are for unethical behavior or inappropriate behavior, or who draw things to their employer's attention and then are penalized for doing it. So you're really a model of how people should respond, and in that sense, we're happy to recognize your courage.
Thank you, Jim, for those comments. It was very kind. I can tell you that a lot of times we look at whistleblowers, and if you haven't experienced it, you have maybe an impression of someone like Edward Snowden or Aaron Brockovich or those types of individuals, or someone's leaving a building with a briefcase full of cash, but really that's not, I don't think, very common in the reality. And the reality is that most whistleblowers are really simple people who are honest, caring people like you and I, who decide to simply speak honestly to protect the public and to protect the organizations they work for.
Well, I mean, that's certainly been my experience, and Ian, who's also a whistleblower, could speak to that. I mean, is it your sense, Ian, that most whistleblowers just see something wrong, assume it'll get fixed, they point it out to their bosses or superiors, thinking that will fix the matter, and instead they're turned on?
Absolutely, and that's what's really remarkable is that you expect that a system that's working properly, that's what they would do. The organizational leaders would take the message and improve it. Sadly, that's not the case, unfortunately, for everybody. Scott, I'm really impressed with how you fought this battle on your own. I mean, you went through 95% of this process as a self-represented litigant going through the system. It's really remarkable.
Well, I think, though, to be accurate, there's a very large part of this case, which is the negligent investigation that was performed by the outside investigation firm. And on that matter, I was self-represented and a self-represented litigant for quite a while. But I have to really give credibility to, Kelly Van Buskirk Law. When I first approached trying to find legal counsel for the situation, I went through 17 lawyers interviews to try and determine if anybody had any knowledge. And really, lawyers don't have a knowledge about whistleblowing law. And in New Brunswick, our laws are very much a patchwork. So there's disjointed legislation to try and protect a whistleblower given the circumstances of what whistleblowing involves. So in my particular situation, when you have the termination, you've got your Public Service Labor Relations Act speaks to that. There are human rights violations that are being claimed, and there's a process for that. There's the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which the whistleblower report and disclosure was tied to harassment. So there was a respect for workplace policy, which, by the way, if I just stop and talk about that a bit, in Canada in 2020, there was some research that came out that said 65% of all Canadians experienced harassment in the workplace. And so many of the provinces got together and said, look, we've got a crisis here. And so what they did is they made it mandatory that provinces have to have a respectful workplace policy. The striking part about that, in my case, is that when you go to use the policy, that it's their policy, it's their law. And when you go to use it, you're villainized, and they act as though there's some how audacious I am to use the legislation they put in place to solve a problem.
That's right. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the typical treatment that whistleblowers get. Instead of gratitude that you pointed out a problem that can be fixed,
Yeah.
on the contrary, they go after you because they want the problem hidden. And that's one of the reasons that the Center for Free Expression has started the Peter Bryce Prize, to draw attention to the situation of the many Canadians who are trying to do the right thing by pointing out wrongdoing and are penalized for it. And the solution, of course, is to get proper whistleblower protection, of which, in a big study by the International Bar Association, looked at the whistleblower protection legislation in 40 major countries around the world, found that Canada's was the worst in the world.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work to do. We're really honored to recognize you today, Scott, and thank you very much for your
My pleasure.
background on this, Ian. I'd like to say that nominations for the 2026 award, we give it annually, are open until December 31st of this year. So if you know of someone that you've read about, or in your community or in your workplace, who has stood up for what's right, and that hasn't resulted in a beneficial change, but that rather quite the opposite, please go to our website, which is cfe.torontomu.ca, and click on the Peter Bryce Prize, and there you can find both a list of the past recipients of the award, the winners of the award, a biography of Peter Bryce, but you can also find the nomination form to put in the name of anyone you think would be a deserving recipient for 2026. So again, thank you to the audience for coming, and thank you to Ian, and most of all, congratulations, Scott.
Thank you. It's an honor, really. Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone. We'll see you again. Thank you for joining us today.